Let's check in with the results on some of the amendments in Florida. As you know, voters working on 6 amendments in this election. Voters deciding that it's going to be a First Amendment #1 passing because it needed 60%, like all the amendments, to go ahead and pass. This is the citizenship requirement to vote in Florida elections, and it was expected to pass, and that indeed has happened tonight. Now, here are the results for Amendment 2. This would raise the minimum wage in Florida. And so far, with 98% of the precincts reporting barely over 60%, but if this stays as it is, it will pass. And that would raise the minimum wage from what it is right now, which is $8.65, to $15 by the year 2026. Now let's take a look at Amendment 3. It's currently failing right now, below that 60%, 57 voting yes, 43% saying no. And if it were to pass, it would be a big change for our primary election system in Florida. Right now, you know, we have a closed primary. You have to be a registered voter as a Republican or a Democrat to vote. This amendment would allow independents to vote, but unless they can inch up over that 60%, this is not going to pass.
And so, Jeannie, let's talk now about Florida's Amendment 4 failing to pass right here. This would have totally changed the way we amend the Constitution in Florida. It would have made it much harder, requiring an amendment to go through the voting process twice. But again, it failed to reach that 60% threshold, so it does not pass. Now, Amendment 5, it has passed. It extends a tax break called the Save Our Homes benefit. So with 98% of precincts reporting, it has met the 60% threshold. 74% saying yes, they want Amendment 5 to pass. And we can also say that Amendment 6 has passed, providing homestead property discounts for widows of veterans. With 98% of precincts reporting, it has gotten an overwhelming majority saying yes, 90% yes to 10% no. So let's dive deeper into these amendments in Florida. Dr. Will Miller is with Jacksonville University, joining us now. He has served as a strategic advisor to elected officials. His areas of expertise include campaigns, elections, and polling. So Dr. Miller, first I want to talk to you about Amendment 2. That's the amendment that would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour in Florida by 2026. Right now, with 98% of precincts reporting, it has 61% approval. So if this does pass, talk about the impact it would have on our state.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be a definite economic impact. Thankfully, like a lot of states that have gone with the minimum wage increase, it's showing the staggered increase going immediately to $10 an hour in September of 21, and then $1 per year through 2025. I think what's really interesting, obviously, with this amendment right now is it sits just outside the cusp of the half percent recount, sitting at about 60.8%. And then obviously, too, if you look at the local factor in Duval, that amendment actually didn't get to the supermajority, barely crossing the 58% threshold.
Interesting. Okay, so now talk about Amendment 3. That is the one that would change the way Florida has primaries. Right now we have closed primaries, so if you're a registered independent, you cannot vote in the Republican or the Democratic primary. We have not called this amendment yet, but kind of talk about the impact that this would have if it does pass.
Yeah, absolutely. This would definitely be a game changer as we think about how primary elections are conducted in the state of Florida, moving to an open primary system, moving obviously to a 2-move forward. It doesn't exactly surprise me that it's not quite getting to that supermajority status. As you look at the statewide results for the presidential election, we know that we have quite a mix of partisan influences in the state of Florida. And the fact that we can't get to 60% on something that would allow individuals from outside of a party in particular areas to potentially have an impact on what that party chooses to do in terms of putting candidates forward for general elections isn't exactly surprising, but this is definitely a conversation that comes up somewhat regularly. I mean, historically, Florida's tried constitutional amendments to move towards open primaries. So I think this will be one that we'll probably see investigated further as we look at what the parties continue to do in the state.
All right, Dr. Miller with Jacksonville University, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Anthony?